Chapter 17, Part 2 of 40,000 Miles Over Land and Water. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 40,000 Miles Over Land and Water by Ethel Gwendoline Vincent. Chapter 17, The Scenes of the Indian Mutiny. Part 2. Friday, January 23rd. We are terribly startled and disturbed by the news in this morning's Pioneer, which tells of the Battle of Abu Klea in the Sudan, as my brother-in-law, Colonel Honorable George Goff, commanding the mounted infantry, was, we see, engaged in it. We set to work at a second day's sightseeing, therefore, with heavy hearts and distracted minds. It may have been this which made the places we saw today less interesting than those of yesterday. Nashef Ashraf contains the tomb of the first king of Oud. You pass under a gateway bright with yellow ochre, and which has depicted on it two brown monsters, with their paws meeting over the arch. This leads to a square building with a round dome. Inside, you behold a sea of chandeliers, swathed in turkey twill bags, literally, with green and red and blue globes hanging from the ceiling, all remains of the last Muharram. The king and his wife are buried in the center, in the midst of the usual decorations of gilt railings, of canopies with silver fringes, and beautifully embroidered silk palls. But hanging on the walls at the entrance are some very curious frames, containing a collection of miniatures of the kings of Oud, with another set of their wives. The flowers and birds of these frames are exquisitely represented, and the portraits themselves are very perfect, with the different expressions, the jewels and the ornaments very delicately delineated. We felt obliged to go and see Secunda Bog, for though it is only a small enclosure with high walls, broken in places, every inch of this spot must have been saturated with blood, where the 2,000 rebel sepoys were slaughtered to a man by the 93rd Highlanders and 53rd Foot, a terrible retribution for the fire with which they had been harassing us previously. Its original use, as a garden given by the Nawab Waji Ali to a favorite wife, was very different from the slaughterhouse it is now known as. On the banks of the muddy Gumti are the Chutar Munzel and the Kaiser Pressund. The former is used as a club and the latter as the High Court of Justice. Both buildings are remarkable from the little gilt umbrellas, or shutters, which surmount the various towers and which make them easily known from the mass of other buildings. The club was originally a seraglio. It has a pretty exterior, with the carved belt of stone, painted red to contrast with the prevailing whiteness, and the magnificent banqueting hall inside, hung with numerous chandeliers, must be particularly appropriate to its present use, however wrong that use was in the first instance. On the opposite side of the road is Lal Baranduri, or the museum, whose veranda is supported by the figures of Negroes standing with arms folded and bearing the pillars on their heads. It is painted bright red both inside and out. It used to be the throne room, where was held the durbar when the president enthroned a new king. Now it is full of glass cases containing rubbish, and only interesting from the large model of the siege of the residency, the red and green flags showing in what close proximity the armies were. The Kaiserbog is a very marvelous collection of buildings, standing in their midst in the court, whether it be the medley of architecture or the crudeness of the yellow ochre walls relieved with pink and mingling with the green lines of the Venetian shutters. The effect is startling. We see in these two-storied buildings, Italian windows between Corinthian pillars, and these surmounted by Saracenic arcades, or irregular openings of no style whatever. The Chandawali Baradari, a stone building in the center, is used now as a town hall or concert room. I noticed that the residents of Lucknow have a very practical idea of turning these ancient buildings, the glory of the city, to their own uses. There is the Jilokana, or place where the royal processions used to start from. The Chini Bagh, so called because of the china vases that used to decorate it, and the Hazrat Bagh, guarded by green mermaids. Farther on, there are the buildings built by the royal barber and sold by him to the king for his harem. It was here the rebel Begum held her court and kept our prisoners confined in a stable nearby. Yet further still there is the tree, with the roots paved with marble, with Shah Wajid Ali, clothed in the yellow rags of a fakir, beggar, sat during the great fair. It was the chief work of the present ex-king of Oud. We finished up our morning by a visit to the Chowk. Driving there, we passed the House of the Sun, now the Martiniers Girls' School, and which is interesting just now, because at the time of the mutiny it was captured from the rebels by the Company of the 90th, under Captain, now Lord, Wolseley, with some other troops. In the afternoon, we revisited the Residency and the Imambara. Returning from the latter, we stopped to watch a band of prisoners at work on a new railway embankment, in charge of their orange-clad jailers. They were all heavily chained, and whilst carrying the earth to and fro in baskets and throwing it down at the feet of the overseer, we could not help thinking that the jailers were unnecessarily harsh, the use of the switch in their hands too frequent, with the often repeated "Chilao." We waited to see them marched away from their work, hand in hand, the road being previously kept clear of the friends who were waiting to catch a glimpse of them at a distance. Some of the men were very old and tired, whilst others only walked with great difficulty on account of the tightness of their chains. We drove through the lines of the cantonment, the military and civil, with their rows of bungalows, all with that untidy and temporary look which characterizes the bungalow. It is very strange, when driving up to one, to call, to draw up opposite the drawing-room window in the veranda. Indian society under these circumstances gives you no opportunity for the polite untruth of "not at home." Many of the bungalows we went into in the course of our Indian travels were very pretty, with their bright fulquaries and striped purdas, but I can never grow accustomed to the lazy necessity of ground-floor bedrooms, opening to and separated from the drawing-room only by a curtain. Of course, there are all manner of appliances against the heat. A punkah, pulled day and night by relays of wallahs. Shutter doors and windows, to keep the rooms dark and yet cool. Chicks, or fine wooden Venetian blinds, and tatties, placed in windows and doorways. These latter are formed of the root of a grass, and, kept constantly moist, freshen the air which passes through them into the room. It is also strange, when you wish to buy anything, to be driven by an avenue up to a bungalow, the shop. We called on General Dillon, who is at present commanding the division here, and then driving down the mall, the inevitable accompaniment to the lines. We listened to the band playing till the malarious mist drove us home. We noticed the church of Christ Church, whose pinnacles were being repaired after the damage done them by the storm as we came home, and the more humble structure of the American Presbyterian Mission Church. It is said that these missions do far more good than the SPG or CMS societies of the Church of England, on account of the divisions of high and low church of the latter, for the natives come and ask if they are of different religions. C. went to see Lord Randolph Churchill, who arrived in Lucknow early this morning and who is having a splendid reception from Europeans and natives wherever he goes. Every spot in and about Lucknow is marked by reminiscences of the mutiny. Some position of the enemy snatched from them by our troops. Some palace or garden war hotly disputed. But you need to be an enthusiastic tactician to thoroughly appreciate the interest which attaches to Lucknow, the city and center of the scenes of the mutiny. Saturday, January 24th. Getting up this morning at 6 a.m. and dressing by the modest light of one candle was a miserable struggle. The extreme changes of temperature which one is subjected to during one day's traveling in India is very trying. From the intense cold of the early start, we warm into life at 10 a.m., and by noon are suffering from the heat. At sundown, the chill creeps on again, and by night, the bitter cold returns. Through the day, we are alternating from ulster to dust cloak, and returning at last to the warmth of our morning friend. We had reached the second state of temperature by the time we arrived at Kanpur, where we were to spend the day. The railway hotel, kept by Mr. Lee, is atrociously bad, and certainly ought not to be taken as a fair specimen of a dak bungalow. As usually, and especially when under government management, they are excellent. The dak bungalow is an important feature in Indian traveling. Maintained by the government, a fixed charge is made, and the traveler enters in a book the sum paid, with date of departure and arrival. He is only entitled to shelter for 48 hours, in accordance with the postal rules. A miserable breakfast determined us to take refuge at the station for dinner. We had a pleasant rest of some hours, sitting reading in the veranda before starting. Kanpur may be described as a dreary plain, across which in dotted lines run the cantonment barracks, whilst clouds of dust trace the numerous roads which intersect it in all directions. A single bullock cart raises for the moment an impenetrable wall of sand. The Memorial Church of All Souls stands out conspicuously amongst a cluster of trees on the plain. It is of red brick, faced with white stone, and looks like a handsome village church. The inside is disappointing. The mural tablets to those who fell during the mutiny cover the walls, the only fine one in marble being that erected to the engineers. One cannot help wishing that instead of the usual ugly white tablet in the form of a tomb or urn bordered with black, some beautiful monument had been designed with a grand inscription, like the one we were to see presently in the garden. The black dome of the chancel is somewhat curious, being intended to represent the heavens, with the constellations in gold. 14 memorial tablets from the semicircle of the chancel, giving the name of each and every one who died during the siege. The inscription opens as follows: "To the glory of God, and in memory of more than 1,000 Christian people who met their deaths hard by between the 6th June and the 15th July, 1857. By the side of the church there is a flat slab, paved round with blue and white marble, with the inscription in raised letters arranged so as to form a cross. Here Major Vibart, with 70 officers and soldiers, are buried, who, after escaping from the massacre, were recaptured and murdered. We were now within Wheeler's entrenchment, the small enclosure protected only by a mud wall of 4 feet high, hastily thrown up, and where the besieged maintained themselves for 21 days. We could trace the entrenchment exactly by means of the small posts set up with W.E. on them. Then we came to another monument, built on the site where St. John's Church stood at the time of the siege. Here, 75 Eurasians and natives, with their families, had taken refuge after the evacuation of the entrenchment, and were murdered to a man by order of Nana Sahib. Our interest is still further deepened when we see the stone well, riddled with shot yet used, where the oxen still toil up and down the inclined causeway. It lies just outside the entrenchment, and was the only water the besieged could obtain. Every drop was fetched at the risk of life, with shots dropping at random over the open space that had to be traversed. Next we go some distance away to the well, where an awful memory still clings to the midnight parties, bringing each night the bodies of victims who had died of cholera, heat, apoplexy, smallpox, or wounds during the day. They were thrown into the well as the only means of safe disposal for the survivors, and Captain Jenkins, who still held the bungalow, commanding the position, kept up a covering fire for these parties. The spot is now made into a garden and marked by a Byzantine cross, with this inscription: "Under this cross were laid, by the hands of their fellows in suffering, the bodies of those men, women, and children who died nearby during the heroic defense of Wheeler's entrenchment, when beleaguered by the rebel Nana, June 6 to 27th A.D. 1857. And on the pedestal of the cross, our bones are scattered at the grave's mouth, as when one cutteth and cleaveth wood upon the earth. But our eyes are unto thee, O God the Lord." Psalm 141. 4 smaller crosses at the corners gives the names of the officers and the men of their regiments, whose bodies were thrown into the well. Captain Jenkins is one of them, and it is told how Private Murphy was the only individual of the C Company of the 84th Regiment who escaped. Then we drove about a mile away to the deep ravine called the Sati Chowra Ghat. Here were the very steps, shaded by the same peepal tree, where the men, women, and children went down on their way to embark from the ghat on the river. They had surrendered to Nana Sahib, as will be remembered, on the condition of being transported in boats up the Ganges to Allahabad. The women and children had embarked in the open boats and been pushed into the middle of the stream. The stone platform flanked by 2 archways was crowded with others. There was a cry of treachery, and the soldiers of Nana Sahib, acting under his orders, opened fire. Volley after volley was fired upon the helpless occupants of each boat, a hidden battery of guns behind a tree being brought to bear upon those on the landing stage. It became a wholesale butchery. The women and children who were captured and not massacred were taken that night to the assembly rooms. Here atrocities were committed such as even the page of history cannot detail, until a century has passed, and the victims and their near relations shall be laid to rest. Some cannot ever be mentioned in the ears of ladies, but the world learnt them, if it never learnt before what our sex can endure. One lady killed the native with his own sword when he attempted, with Nana's permission, to take her away to his house. Thus they remained for upwards of a fortnight when, at Havelock's approach, Nana Sahib ordered a general massacre at the assembly rooms, the House of Massacre as it came to be called. The natives would not hold the Europeans whilst their throats were cut, because it was against their caste, and then Nana ordered his officers to get men to cut or fire them down. 100 were told off for the men, 100 for the women. After incessant firing for several hours, whether on purpose or not, was never known. Only 2 were found to have been killed. At last Nana found 5 butchers, belonging to the Bowery, or lowest caste of all, who undertook the bloody slaughter. For 5 hours, from 5 till 10 in the morning, they cut and slashed, till few were left. The bodies were cast into the well. This well became so full that, the water causing the bodies to swell, many rose above the surface, when branches of trees were laid across to keep them under. It is on this awful spot that the most perfect monument, full of beauty and peace, has been so fitly erected. In the center of the memorial garden stands the lovely statue of Marocchetti. It is a white marble figure, draped with head downcast and eyes full of tender sorrow. The hands are crossed on the breast, each holding the palm branch of victory, and the large curving wings are unfolded. The delicate delineation of each feather on the latter shows the perfect finish of the whole. The palm branches rise over each shoulder, from the declivity of the wings, where they are joined behind, and in the center there is a white marble cross, against which the figure is supposed to be leaning. The drooping attitude and the gentle expression of sorrow are very touching. The angel figure seems to be declaring to us the inscription over the entrance. These are they which came out of great tribulation, and have washed their robes. The carved octagonal screen, showing daylight between its delicate tracery, is worthy of the beautiful monument it surrounds and guards. The harmony of the whole is maintained by the repetition of the octagonal form. The screen is octagonal, and so are the steps which descend to the richly carved pillar. The 3 tiers of marble, the pedestal of the figure, are also octagonal. The purity and beauty of the memorial is completed by the inscription, "Sacred to the perpetual memory of a great company of Christian people, chiefly women and children, who near this spot were cruelly massacred by the followers of the rebel Nana, Dundapur of Bithor, and cast, the dying with the dead, into this well below on the 15th day of July, 1857. The house of massacre is below the slope of the memorial, and is marked by a white cross on a black marble base. The original little cross is shown inside the burial ground, the base of which marked the well, and the cross at the top the house of massacre, a poor but touching little memorial, raised by 20 men of the same regiment who were passing through Cawnpore, some time afterward, as it tells us. The burial ground is on the spot where 2 bungalows adjoining the assembly rooms were found, whose walls were written in blood, describing the agonies of the prisoners. They were destroyed by Havelock's soldiers in the spot selected for the cemetery, as the ground was soft for digging. It took the men 4 days to bury the dead. Now the spot is enclosed with a handsome railing, and it presents the appearance of a garden of tangled roses and creepers, which cover the graves. There are 72 mounds in all, but many of them are nameless graves, and it is known that 4 were often buried in one grave. Immediately opposite them is another 3-cornered piece of ground railed in, where more of the mutilated remains of the women and children were collected and interred. It is a very noticeable fact that none of the dates on the memorial stones of the mutiny agree. They vary in fixing it as breaking out on the 15th, 17th, or 18th of June. The garden, which is really part of the old assembly garden, is beautifully kept. Broad carriage drives lead down the palm avenues and amongst the bright masses of flower beds. We left Cawnpore at 6 o'clock. Half an hour after midnight we had to change carriages at Tundla Junction, and we arrived at Agra at the ghastly hour of 2 in the morning. As I sat in the gharry outside the station, waiting for C with the luggage to appear, for the natives were half asleep at that late hour, I could see the red battlements of the fort rising opposite against the half-moonlit sky. End of Chapter 17, Part 2.